Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to tell you the difference between politicians and mechanics. Unfortunately, here in the United States, both politicians and mechanics are always on the top of the list of least trusted people. But there is quite a difference, and I'm going to show you all of them. Politicians get elected, then they're in for years. But a mechanic, they're more or less elected job by job. They're elected by somebody saying, okay, I'm going to take my car to this guy, and he can fix it. And while politicians often promise things that years later still are never done, if a mechanic promises to fix your car by a certain time and he doesn't, he's not going to be your mechanic for much longer. Gee, maybe politicians should be more like mechanics. And of course, politicians have millions of dollars donated to them to get elected, so they owe a lot of people favors. It's not exactly an honest above board way to do business if you think about it. Now, in my own repair business, I never advertised. People knew I knew how to fix cars, they brought them to me, and that's how I got business, word of mouth. So if you are looking for a good mechanic, perhaps stay away from the ones that spend a whole bunch of money advertising. Now, another way you can tell a politician from a mechanic is how they dress. The average politician, you're going to see them in suits and ties all the time. Me, I'm always leery of people wearing suits and ties. They got something to prove by what they're wearing. Now, most real mechanics are like me. The only time you'll see me in a suit and a tie is either at a wedding or a funeral. Now, some guys are nuts about clean uniforms, might get a little bit too carried away, because I do have to say, some of the best mechanics I ever met, man, they were really dirty. They didn't care. They were into the machinery. I didn't care what they look like. And often they don't care what they drive either. In my father's day of running a garage, the owners had to have a beater car for themselves and a good car for their wife. Because if they were seen driving a shiny new Cadillac, people would say, they charge too much money, I'm not going there. And if you look at the difference between politicians and mechanics in another way, politicians have an entire retinue of people working under them, doing the dirty jobs. Where a real mechanic, they're doing the dirty jobs themselves. Now, there certainly are quite a few bad mechanics out there, otherwise they wouldn't have such a reputation as the least trusted people. I once worked for a guy, and I'm not making this up. He wore a white lab coat and smoked a pipe as an affectation and pretended he was a mechanic. Now, I only worked for this guy for about 3 weeks. He fired me because he kept making mistakes in analyzing what the customer needed, and I'd say, no, it really needs this. He'd say, no, I know what's wrong, replace that. And then, of course, a couple days later, the car comes back because what I said was wrong was the real thing. It made him look like a fool, so he fired me. At least with the repair business being what it is, you do have to actually fix things correctly as often and as quickly as possible. About a year later, his business went out of business. That was the end of that. That's when I started my own business, realizing that if a clown like this can run a business, an honest mechanic like me is certainly going to have no problem getting customers and doing it by himself. Now, granted, there aren't that many mechanics out there that either want or have the ability to deal with people professionally, because truthfully, a lot of mechanics are loners. They like working by themselves. Most mechanics spend the majority of their career working by themselves, actually fixing a car, while politicians generally work in groups, and they rarely fix anything at all. They are what they say in Texas, all hat and no cattle. But unfortunately these days, there are an awful lot of bad mechanics out there. They will promise you something that they never do. I've seen it many times. One shop doesn't have an ability to do a particular job, but they'll take it in. I've seen this in Houston in the past, where a chain repair shop would say, oh yeah, we do automatic transmissions. As soon as the customer left, they would take the car down the street to their friend who had a transmission shop, who would charge them $1,200 to fix the transmission, and then charge the customer $2,400 for the job. There's crooked people in all walks of life. That's why I've always told people for years, when I was just a mechanic fixing cars, I say to people, hey, you got a mechanic you trust? Yes. I said, well, stick with the guy. You trust him? Stick with him. Well, he charges a little bit too much. And I tell them, hey, honesty is worth the price, because anybody say something's going to cost this and then make up a bunch of stuff and give you a bigger bill, which is what often happens. So if you do find a good mechanic, or your friends know good mechanics, mechanic. Tell everyone about it. That's how I ran my business for decades. No advertising, strictly word of mouth. No banners flying around or advertisements saying how great this guy is fixing cars. The truth from real people who had their cars fixed by mechanics who knew what they were doing. You can't trust advertisements. You can't even trust many sites on the internet because there's so many ways for people to wrangle good reviews. I remember years ago, a guy in Houston who had banners saying, oh, these guys picked me as the best mechanic in Houston. And then you find out that the guy just has his mechanics in their downtime typing on the internet to say how great his shop was. You just can't believe that stuff. Just like you can't believe what most politicians are going to promise you. They're just saying it because they want to get elected. And once elected, they got millions from various places. Hey, they owe those people. Those are the people that they're going to represent, not you, the person voting for them. And just like the politicians promising things that will never come to pass, don't go to some place that's advertising you get this free or brake jobs $29.95. Those are just lost leaders to get you into their store so they can start selling you stuff. Because just like politicians, a mechanic who spends a lot of money advertising, he's got to pay for all that advertising before he makes a profit. So he's going to try to sell you more stuff and he's going to have higher prices in reality when you get your actual bill. I've even seen mechanics who use religion to sell their business, like politicians using religion, where they'd go to church, they'd work on the people's cars at that church, use it as a way to drum up business. And some of the mechanics that do that, I saw how they overcharged their customers, and it just amazed me. Well, it amazed me because they're saying that they cared, they were all believed the same thing, and then they just went and ripped them off. So in that respect, some mechanics are exactly like politicians. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that politicians and mechanics are always near the top of the list of least trusted people in the United States. And of course, as they say, one rotten apple ruins the whole basket. Let's try to change things here. If you find a good mechanic, make sure you tell all your friends about it so you can propagate good mechanics instead of ones that are going to rip you off. Now, unfortunately, due to the large amount of money that politicians need these days to get elected, I don't see much hope in making them be honest. It's exact opposite seems to be happening in that case. As the elections cost more and more, they need more and more money from more and more places, so they owe more and more favors. At least with mechanics, hey, if they're good and they can fix something, they'll be able to get a nice clientele, keep their clients happy, and make a good living at it without ripping people off. So now you know the difference between mechanics and politicians and how you can use it to your advantage, at least in getting your car repaired. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Louis Loa says, Scotty, I'm debating which of these two cars would be more reliable. The Mustang V6 2014 or a 2014 Subaru BRZ. I read that the Mustang transmissions are really bad. Well, you're talking about V6. See, the problem with the Mustangs is the big V8s put out a lot of power, and they have had some problems with their transmissions in them, especially when they started making some of the transmissions for some of the Mustangs in China. They really had problems with them. Out of those choices, it depends on what you want. The V6 doesn't particularly have transmission problems, and it doesn't put out all the horsepower. And if you like the look of a Mustang and driving it around, they're not race cars with the V6, but they're totally reliable for driving around in. Or a BRZ is a much more aggressive car for cornering. You want to corner fast and you like zipping around, it outperforms the Mustang by far in cornering. It's a completely different type of vehicle. Do you want a Japanese kind of mini race car type thing, or do you want the classic Mustang? That's more your choice. If you are a zippy driver, you like zipping around, hey, Subaru would be a lot more fun. But if you're just looking for a cruiser and something that looks good, yeah, you might like the Mustang. But if you're a serious driver, with the V6 and the Mustang, you probably have more fun in the Subaru. 1980s car lover says, I see the Chevy Uplander van as a pile of junk. Is the older line of Chevy Astro-Benz better or worse? Well, I'm not a fan of any of those GM products, but yes, the Chevy Astro van is much better than the Uplanders. The Uplander's one of the worst vehicles they ever made. And truth be told, I had custom with the Chevy Astrovans. Now things, electric windows would break, lots of electronic crap would break on them, the paint would come off of them and stuff, but they still ran. I had a guy in Houston, used to do the lighting for CBS TV when I did a talk show there, and he had one that had 190,000, and it looked like a pile of junk, but it still ran. He'd take it from Houston to go to the races at the Bonneville Salt Flats once a year and drive it back, and he had no problems making it there and back. So yeah, the Astrovans were better than the Uplanders. That said, they're older. You want to make sure they're not all worn out. If your friend's looking to buy something that's less than $5,000, you can certainly find them. You just want to make sure they're decent shape now. So have a guy like me check it out before he buys it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.